Okay, so what the next thing that we're going to dig into here is materials. Now, I am going to dig into on the Manage tab here, the materials menu or the materials command over on the left-hand side of the Manage Dialog Box. Okay, so in the materials dialog box here, just a little refresher on the parts of the material dialogs interface. So in the top left-hand corner, we have all of the materials defined in the project. And then down here in the bottom, these are materials from the Revit library. So we call these the out-of-the-box materials. These are materials that ship with Revit that can be imported into your project if you have need. So bottom left, materials that you can get from the software. Upper left, materials that are already in your project. Now, if we take a typical material like brick, so if you put in a search term in the top left corner, that will allow you to search for a material in your project. So if we take brick, for instance, brick is an interesting material because it has a separate hatch when shown in elevation compared to when we see that hatch when we cut through it in section, either with a plan view or with a section view. And a pro tip, folks, anytime that you happen to see a hatch, whether it's a hatch in a filled region or a hatch in one of your materials, don't use black for your hatch color. Always change your hatches to 50% gray. This just makes your drawings easier to read because it allows the black lines around the edges of your object to have more contrast with the white background of the paper. And if you use black hatch lines everywhere, it just makes your drawings more difficult to read. So each material that we have in our project has a variety of different properties. So we have a graphics asset. So this defines how it looks in our hidden line drawings. And then we have an appearance asset, which defines how this material will look like when it is being rendered. And there are other assets which can be added to a material as well. So if you're doing energy modeling in Revit to see how much energy your building is going to use all throughout the year, you might want to add the physical asset for your, or the thermal asset rather for your project materials. And structural engineers may be interested in the physical assets like the modulus of elasticity and all that good stuff. So from an architectural perspective, you might be interested in adding a thermal asset, but tonight what we're really going to be talking about is the appearance asset. So if you're looking at any of the given materials in your project and you don't see a physical or thermal asset, it doesn't matter. What we're really only interested in tonight is the appearance asset. So all of these assets are basically different subsets of features for any given material. So you have a material name that you see in the list, and then the name of the appearance asset, as it's called, may be the same, or it might be different. Now, the name of this appearance asset that you see comes from a library of digital imagery that's provided by Autodesk for you to use in Revit when you are rendering. Now, one of the out-of-the-box materials that you see down at the bottom of the list in the bottom left-hand corner, these include not just the material name, but all of the different tabs, all of the different assets. So if I import one of these materials into my project, not only do I get the graphics asset and the appearance asset, you can see I'm also getting the physical and the thermal. So you can see here that the Revit material which I have added, the appearance asset is different. So what this is, this appearance asset is a separate catalog of basically digital appearances for your materials in your project. So what we're going to look at here is the asset browser. Now this dialog box opens up a whole series of folders in which are stored digital pictures of objects or means of providing the appearance of different kinds of materials. So here for brick, if we're looking for a different look for brick, we can type in brick here. And now we're gonna search through the library of different colors of brick that we can now import for use when we do renderings in our projects. When you're in the asset browser, on the right hand side you can change the size of the swatch that's provided so you can get a better look at these appearance assets before you bring them into your project. So that way you can kind of scroll through and you can find some of these different kinds of brick, and you can see there's different folders here. So when I search for brick up top, I've got all these different folders that I can plug through and have a look and see if there's anything here that kind of suits what I'm looking for. So if you put your cursor on the top, the parent folder for each, you can scroll through the whole lot, or if you want to just look at sort of, certain subfolders, so here's your glazed fire brick. It matches the search term brick, and away you go. Now the way that rendering software works is that they have different tricks that they use to approximate the appearance of real world materials. So these lists of material assets, as they call them, the appearance asset, it's like a plugin for your Revit material. So of course what you want to make sure is that you find the right plugin of the appearance that makes sense for the particular material that you're choosing. So if I say brick common brown and then I decide that I'm going to use this red glossy fire brick for my outside brick, that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So that would now be the appearance of my brick. But what happened to the old version of my brick? It's still in the project, and we can go back to the asset browser, and at the very, very top of the asset browser are what we call document assets. So these are appearance assets that have been loaded into our project, and they're still there. So that old brown common brick, which I had just seconds ago, is still here. And if I go back and search for brick, and I click on the document assets folder at the top, I can scroll on down, and here I'm going to make the icons a little bit smaller. I can go back and find that original brick that I had before. I'm not sure which one it is. Perhaps this one? Not sure. I don't think it was that one. But anyways, I could go back and put it in again. Now, when you are looking at the appearance asset that your particular material is using, pay attention to see if you see a little 1 above the hand. That means that this appearance asset, brick soldier course, is being shared with one other material in the project. So there's nothing wrong with 2 materials in your project sharing a single appearance. It's probably not that common. Usually each separate material that we have in our project will have its own appearance for when we render it. So I go back and just see if I can find that appearance asset again. Yep, I have no idea where I did with it, but it's not removed from the project. So maybe the question might be, is there any overhead that you're adding to your project by adding these appearance assets into your project? And the answer is no. However, If you want to get rid of some of these appearance assets that have been loaded into the project but aren't pointing at any of your materials, and that can happen. So for instance, if I go into the asset browser and I load in a bunch of appearance assets into my project, well, each material can only have one appearance asset sitting in the slot. So if I'd previously loaded 3 or 4 different appearance assets, but I've only chosen to use one, well, those other 3 appearance assets are in my project, but they're not really being used. And so it makes good sense to purge them. And we'll just have a quick look at that. So on the Manage tab, if you choose Purge Unused, now as we said before, you want to make sure that you choose Check None. If we go down to the list here, you can see that there are material assets. And here we have appearance assets. So what you're seeing here are a series of appearance assets, that is, rendered appearances of all these different materials, and they're not pointing to any particular material. So they've been added into the project, but there's no materials that are making use of them. So we can go ahead, click the first one, click the last one, and we could purge all of these appearance assets. It's not going to make your project load any faster. It's just a management thing so that you have fewer appearance assets in your project. You might also find it useful every once in a while to completely purge materials that you're not using in the project. So here's a series of materials which aren't being used by any of the construction assemblies in your project. So none of your floors, walls, roofs, ceilings, windows, any 3D object is making use of any of these materials. Where'd they come from? Some of them might have been in the template originally. Some of them might have been inside families, that when you loaded the family into your project, the material definitions came along for the ride, and then you deleted the families from the project, but the materials still remain. So if you wish, you can delete these materials. So if I go ahead and delete a bunch of these materials, I might decide that I want to keep some of these other materials that are here. So I'm just going to get rid of some of these metals. And I'll get rid of a bunch of these woods. So if I purge these ones, what's going to happen is the materials are gone, but that doesn't get rid of the material assets that were associated with those materials that were purged. So if you really want to clean things out, you'll need to come back in a separate pass, and after you've nuked some materials, you'll have to come back and probably delete some of the appearance assets that were in those materials. So when you purge materials, it doesn't purge the material assets or the appearance assets that went along with those materials. Those have to come out in a second pass. But again, as I said, it doesn't really make any difference in Revit's performance. It just means that the next time you go into the materials dialog box, the list of materials that are in your project is going to be smaller. And if you were to use any particular or work with any particular material and go into the appearance asset and go into the asset browser, the list of document assets would be shorter in this list. So in the end, not really a big deal. Now in terms of creating a new material.
So sorry, Ron, can you create a new material for the glass so they can rendering their site?
Absolutely. So when you start a new project in Revit, there is no grass as a list of materials. Now, inside the materials browser here, Revit collapses all the folders in here that have all the different materials in them. Now, it would be a little bit boring to try and go through here and try and find grass in this list of materials from the Revit library. But what we can do up at the top is we can type in grass. Now I've got it here in this project because I've already loaded it in. But if you don't have grass, go ahead and find it in the lower library. So put grass in the top left. Find grass in the list from the Autodesk's or from the Revit software library and import it into your project. So now you'll have grass and it will render as grass. Make sure that when you go to the graphics tab that for shading, you hit the checkbox so that your grass in shaded mode will approximate the color of the grass when it's rendered. Just make sure that on the shading tab, you check that box for using that rendered appearance. So the other stuff about the dialog box that we're looking at here, I'm going to skip on page 6. And I'm going to skip page 7 because we've kind of talked about the asset browser here. And we're going to move on to page 8 and talk about how you create a new material from scratch. So let's create a new masonry stone material. So I'm just going to go in here and look at what we've got for stone. We do have masonry stone here in the advanced project. So I'm going to create a brand new material that I'm going to call masonry, and I'm going to call it fieldstone. So down the bottom here, we've got our button to create a new material. So there's our default new material. That's the one that was just created. And I'm going to right click and rename it and call it masonry fieldstone. Now, when you create a new Revit material, Revit also creates an appearance asset for it. So here it is, generic, generic in 1 in brackets. So this appearance asset is sitting here, and you know, we could go in here and we could rename it and build up an appearance from scratch, right? So we could take the 10 minutes or so to build all of this up and to get our new material to have an appearance asset that, you know, looks like stone. But I want to skip all that because what I want to do here is to switch out these settings that you see here for something that relates more to stone as a material. Now, these settings that you see down here, they vary. The kinds of settings that you see on the appearance asset for a material, you can see that they change depending on the kind of material that you choose. So if it's metal, it's got a series of settings that you can use, and if it's glass, it's got its own settings, and here if it's masonry, it's got its own settings. So each different kind of material has its own set of settings for approximating real world materials. So if we take something like glass, right? So glass has the sheets of glass that you can set, how reflective the glass is. You can specify a tint color if you wish. So why do we see these settings with certain materials? Where do these settings come from? So the settings that we see for each one of our materials is not based on the material. It's based on the appearance asset. So we were working on some masonry here. We created a new material called masonry. And I think I called it fieldstone. There it is there. So what we need to do is to bring in an appearance asset that is relevant to the kind of material that we are creating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ditch this generic asset for one that more closely approximates what we are after. So I'm going to go into the asset browser and I'm going to type in stone. So in our notes, it suggests that we can go into the Autodesk physical assets here and we can find this one here, fieldstone uncoursed weathered. I should note that the spelling of uncoursed is wrong. Really should be is C-O-U-R-S-E. So coarse is the opposite of fine, the way they've spelled it here. So it's actually the wrong spelling. Anyways, it's got the kind of appearance asset that we want. It's a stone category asset. So we're going to bring that into our project and replace the generic asset with this one. The deed is done. So there's our appearance asset. So now what we have here, are a series of controls that relate well to masonry. Now, we've got a very specific look for the masonry that we want to use here. And what we're going to do is we're going to swap out this particular picture of stones and use one from the Cultured Stone library. So on the side of the picture, you'll see a little drop-down menu, and it says Edit Image. So what we're going to do is we are going to point this to a different image that's in our Session 11 folder. So if we move on to step 7, what we're going to do here is once we get into the texture editor here, now there's two ways that you can do this. You can use the drop-down menu on the side and choose Edit Image, or you can put your cursor on top of the text here for the file name, and you can see it turns blue, and you can click it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into our Session 11 folder, and we're going to grab the CSV 250T file. And so if we want to see what this looks like, I was kind of hoping it would show it on our screen. Oh, there it is. So there you go, Cultured Stone. All right. So that's the image that we want to use instead. So you can see it's changed it from the old rock that we had before. Now, let's have a look at how this will render. Now, if I were to change the scene here to a cube, now I don't know about you, but that looks like cheap and nasty wallpaper from when I was a kid growing up in the 80s. So what's going on here? Well, what we want Revit to do is to create some roughness on the surface of our stone. And to do that, we need something that's called a bump map, or sometimes Revit calls it relief. And so you'll see a checkbox here for a bump pattern. And you can see that we've got one right there in the Session 11 folder. Now, what this does, and what it is that the bump pattern is simply a black and white or a grayscale version of the original image. Then what they've done is they've cranked up the contrast so that really what you see is more sort of sharp blacks and whites, and it looks kind of washed out. And here's what happens. Provided that we've got the scaling matched up between the bump map image and the original image, so right down here we're making sure that we've got the same size pattern here, so 304.8 millimeters, so 1 foot for everything that we're seeing here. That also needs to match the sides of our image. Whoa, so you look right here, it's not matching. So really what this represents is about a 3 foot wide area on our brick. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make these both 1000, and I'm going to hit the unlock button here so I can make these both 1000. So our original image is going to be 1000 by 1000. There you go. And so what we want to do is make sure that our bump map has the same proportions. The reason, of course, that this is important is that we want the black areas and the black and white image to line up perfectly with the same locations in the colored image so that we get a roughening of the outside surface. So what this does is at the time of render, the bump map roughens up the surface of our brick. So you can see here, if we take this bump value and we start cranking it up, it's going to start making a difference on the outside of our rock. And so you can see how the extra shadows are being added. So sometimes it's kind of a little hard to tell about what kind of a value you need, but obviously on the one extreme, you know, you don't want to have the a 0 value, because that just makes it look like wallpaper again. So you just want to make sure that the value is high enough that you are getting some relief into the render. Okay. Now, once this appearance asset has been defined, we can now begin to use it in our definitions in our materials. The other thing, of course, that we can do is we probably want to identify a surface pattern that we want to use here. And it'll be a model pattern. So I'm going to go and make a new fill pattern. So in this case, I think we do provide a series of hatches that you guys can use. I'll just check here. Yeah, so in the session 11 pattern, you can see we've got our Revit hatch patterns. So if we open that up, I think these are one of these here. I'm not sure which. I'm just going to scroll through here and see if I can find. And I'll change my scale here for the hatch, so it's a little bit bigger. Fieldstone. Nope, that's not it. I think it's the something along those lines. So that's the clear ledgestone. So now that material, if we were to see it in our working drawings, it will get this hatch into elevation. And then on the appearance asset, you can see how we've pointed it towards some digital imagery that we provided. Now, once you've created a material, now you'll be able to share it with your office. Now, one of the things that you're going to want to make sure is that both the image for the appearance asset and for the bump map for the appearance asset, these pictures would also need to be stored on your network server. If these images are being stored on a local computer, when another computer goes to render this material, they will not see these images. So that's why it's important to put them onto your network server, so that each copy of Revit in your office will be able to see these images. Now, once you've added a new appearance asset that's different than anything that's in the out-of-the-box materials, it's advisable to create your own library of materials so that they can be shared in the office. So down the bottom of the materials dialog box, if you haven't already in your office, you should create a new library. So what I'm going to do, and again, this library should be placed somewhere on your network server so that users would be able to have access to it. So here, we'll call this the Office Material Library. So once it's created, you'll have a little yellow folder icon here, and now you can right click on it and you can create a category. So for different kinds of materials, like stone, and maybe like carpet. So think of these as being folders into which you can store different kinds of materials. So this masonry fieldstone, now that we've defined it, if we want to add it to our office library, you simply grab that material, drag it down, and stick it into one of the folders that you've created in your office's library. So there you go. That masonry material is now in your office library so that other folks can use it on future projects. All right. I don't know if you folks have any questions. It looks like the chat's pretty quiet here, so I'm going to move on to the last bit of what we'll be talking about here tonight, and that is walkthroughs and solar animations. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about solar animations. And to do this, I'm going to go into the 3D view here. So if you need to do a shadow study for a client, you can use the sun animation tool to provide a solar study of your project. So in your 3D view, you may decide that you want to lock the orientation of the view. So down at the bottom here, you might want to save the orientation and lock the view so that you will maintain this orientation of the project. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we're going to set up the solar animation. So click the sun menu at the bottom here, and we're going to go into the sun settings dialog box. Now, to get the solar study to work, we've got a few things we've got to do first. In our graphic display options, first of all here, we need to enable shadows. So of course, we can't do a shadow study unless shadows are turned on. So that's the first step. Okay, so next thing we can do is we can now move on to the sun menu and set up the sun settings. Now, typically with one of these solar studies, we're doing the daylight to, or dusk to dawn, or wait a minute, the other way around. Dawn to dusk, so basically sunrise to sunset of our project. So we're basically doing a single day solar study. So the next thing to do would be, of course, to select your location, choose the time of year. So if you want to do a September 21st, so here if we choose our fall equinox and go from sunrise to sunset, what we can do is follow the sun's progress through the sky at intervals that we choose. Now, unfortunately, Revit does not do intervals any smaller than 15 minutes. So this means that we're only going to have 49 frames. So the sun is going to move through 49 steps through the sky on its way from sunrise at 5:30 in the morning to sunset at 5:46 in the afternoon. Now, of course, here we can change our location. And again, I'm just going to keep it simple and go down and find Vancouver in the list. Daylight savings time enabled, and away we go. So it's still 49 frames. So that being done, we can go ahead and hit OK. So what we're seeing now is the sun as it appears at sunrise. Now I want to save this. So what I'm going to do here is in my sun settings, it says in session single day. So what I want to do here is choose save settings. So say September 21st, Vancouver, BC. Done. All right. So now what we can do is we can choose preview solar study so we can watch this happen. All right, so now the preview mode is turned on. You'll see a play icon up here, so we can hit the play icon, and now we're going to watch shadows go across the screen. Now, right now, we are looking at this thing in, what do you call it, shaded mode. You can do it in realistic mode as you want. It'll make things just appear a little bit more realistic, including your trees. But it makes the animation go quite a bit slower. And when I say quite a bit slower, I mean like way the heck slower. So in terms of watching a live preview of it, not very exciting at all. Your frame rate is like stupid slow. So you can see here, it is moving, but it's really slow. So if you want to send this shadow study to your clients, you can export this shadow study. So here I'm just going to cancel it. Come on, Revit. I'm hitting the cancel button. Let's do this. There we go. All right, so I'm going to switch to shaded. All right. So if I want to export this shadow study to a video file, I can go to the File menu, and I can choose Export, and I can scroll down here to Images and Animations and choose Solar Study. So here I can choose the horizontal and vertical dimensions of the screen here, and I can set how many frames per second I want. So if it's 15 frames per second, it would only be 3 seconds long. So that's no good. So you probably want, you know, 2 frames per second. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So, 24 seconds is plenty. So somewhere between, around a 30-second mark is fine. So once that's done, go ahead and hit OK. And now you can choose the file type that you want to use for the video. Away we go. Now, video compression is a little bit of a technical feature to talk about here. The notes talk about particular kinds of compressors that can be used to help reduce the size of the video file. So I'm just going to let it grind through here and complete the shadow study. These different kinds of what they're called codecs. So there's the XVID codec, there's the Logarith codec. These are all used to help keep the file or the video quality high while helping to manage the output of the video file and keep it a little bit smaller. So compressors are used, just like the JPEG file format, to provide reasonable quality, but yet not going overboard on file size. Alrighty, so that is our solar study. So now we're going to move on to talk about walkthroughs. We'll just let this thing wrap up here, and then we're going to move on. So there you go, it's done. If you want to go look at this on the desktop, I don't know where it went. Where did it go? Okay, whatever. Moving on. So let's talk about walkthroughs now. So the process of creating a walkthrough begins from the View tab. So in the 3D drop-down, you'll find the walkthrough command. So typically what I do when I am creating a walkthrough for my project is I'll start in 3D. And I'll start, in fact, by looking down on my project in 3D. So let's do that. Okay, so here I'm in a 3D view, and I'm just going to use the default 3D view in the advanced sample project. So I'm basically going to start in a plan orientation in the 3D view. So we fire up the walkthrough command. And the first thing that you are going to do is to draw the path of the walkthrough. So I'll start off-site, and I'm going to come in. So I'm kind of thinking about how far I want the camera to be as I look at the building. So typically what happens is you do a loop around the building, and put a click in, every 30 to 50 meters or so on a larger project. And so now what I'm doing is I'm bringing my camera around. So my intent is to go in through the front doors. And then I'm going to go through the interior corridor. Zoom in a little bit here. And then I'm going to go out into the courtyard. And I'm going to kind of just loop out and turn around and come back and stop about here. So that's going to be the path of my walkthrough. One lap around the building, go through the building, stop while looking in the central courtyard. So once I'm happy with the approximate path for my walkthrough, I hit finish. So there's my walkthrough. So as soon as we are done creating the path, we're going to edit it and make some changes to it. Now, if you happen to kind of lose your place and you click off so that the walkthrough goes away, don't be alarmed. You've still got the walkthrough. You'll see it down in the walkthroughs folder. So if you click on the walkthrough that you've just created, for us it's walkthrough 1, we'll be able to right click on it and choose show camera. And there it brings the walkthrough path back. So now we're going to click on edit walkthrough. And so now what we need to do here, we've got some work to do to make this walkthrough a little bit more sensible. Now, have a look at the path of my walkthrough. It starts underground. So the reason that I like to start in the top view in 3D when I'm creating my walkthrough is so that I have a really good sense of where the path of the camera is going to go on the site with respect to the building. Generally speaking, you will have to adjust the Z elevation of your camera as it flies around the building. It's not very often that you'd have a camera that performs a completely flat flight path. And even if you were working on a completely flat site, it makes for a pretty boring walkthrough if your camera never changes elevation. So the first thing that we need to do is to control our keyframes. Now there are 4 different modes when you are editing the walkthrough, and they're all available from this drop-down menu. The first is to adjust the targeting of the camera as we approach each keyframe. So each click that I made on the screen has produced one of those red dots that you see in the view right now. And each of those views is a keyframe. And it is at each one of these keyframes where we can adjust the targeting of the camera. Now, I think what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to get the path sorted out. So when you switch to path mode, all of the different clicks that you made turn into little blue dots. And each of those blue dots can have their plan and elevation location altered. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with the first dot flying off the edge of the site here. And I'm just going to click and I'm going to drag it upwards. I'm going to drag the next one upwards and the next one upwards and the next one upwards. So what this is doing basically is getting our camera above ground. So what I want to do is I want to kind of fly in from way up high and come in and look at my project from a high elevation, and then smoothly kind of drop down, lower my elevation, and kind of do a fly around of the site. So I'm going to start a little bit higher than the building, and then as I come around the building, I'm going to reduce my elevation. So here you can see I'm adjusting these blue dots and dragging them upwards. So as I come around here, I'm going to drop down until I get a little bit lower, so that I'm at the right height, so that when I come around and come into the front of the building, I'm going to be at the right elevation so that I'm going right through my front doors, you know, about 6 feet above the ground. So once that's done and I'm happy with the elevation of each one of those dots, maybe here I'm going to adjust the path of my camera a little bit here, kind of smooth out the path. The next thing that we need to do is deal with the targeting of the camera. So we need to switch modes from path to active camera mode. The camera is this little blue Instamatic that you can see here underneath my cursor. And so what we need to do is drag it to the first keyframe. Now we're still in 3D here, so you can kind of get a sense of where the camera is looking. I'm going to drag that camera up to the first keyframe, and you can kind of see where the camera is looking. It's not really looking at the building. So what I want to do is at each one of these keyframes is adjust the targeting of the camera so it's more or less looking at the building. So here, kind of looking at where the camera is looking, there's a little targeting icon, which is this pink thing right here. So there's the Instamatic, that's the camera's location. That pink icon is the targeting tool. So what I need to do here is kind of drag that pink dot and raise the camera up and kind of get the camera pointing at the building. So you can see there now. It's hard to tell. Now, the pink dot will have a line that emanates upwards or downwards. If you see at the pink dot that the line is going up, that means that the camera is pointing downwards slightly. If the line is really small, it means that the camera is almost looking level. So what I need to do here is drag this downwards so that I'm pretty certain that it's looking down just enough to be able to see the building. I think it needs to look down even just a little bit more. Now this is something that is kind of a little bit tricky. You need some practice so you get the hang of it. So there, I think that's going to be pretty good. So now, next thing, I drag the Instamatic camera. When you put your cursor over it, it turns pink. Drag it to the next keyframe. And once you get it to the next keyframe, release your mouse and do the targeting again. So again here, just going to get that camera looking over towards the building and maybe down a little bit. That's pretty good. Move on to the next keyframe. So by default, Revit wants the camera to look down the path. Now it's a good idea for all of us to look where we're going, but we don't want to do that with the Revit camera. Really what we want the Revit camera to do is always keep an eye and always be looking at our pretty building. So again, we might have to fine tune this later as we do the walkthrough. But we're just going to fine tune the path of the camera at each one of these locations. So I'm going to return to the top view here so that when I get here I can just simply grab that pink dot in the top view and get the camera pointing at the building. So I'm going to do this really quick. So you have to do this at each keyframe. Now, if you happen to do a lot of keyframes, you'll be cursing yourself because you've got to do so much more targeting. So typically, for a project or for a walkthrough, I try not to make too many keyframes because then it becomes just a bit of a drag to try and manage it all. Should also mention, you can see that there's kind of this thing is forming a triangle. And what Revit is actually telling you here is that that's the view depth. So right now, our camera is only seeing 30 meters. Now we're going to turn the far clip off in a bit. While you're setting up the targeting of the camera, it's actually handier if the far clip is active and it's at a fairly small value because it makes it easier to see where the camera is looking. So again, here as the camera is going through the inside of the building, I'm pretty happy to have the camera look in the direction that we are going. There we go. So as the camera begins to head away from the building, what we really want the camera to do is to turn around and look back at the building. So by the time we get out to here, the camera's already beginning to look back at the building. So again, you're just dragging the cameras to these new locations and adjusting the targeting. And I like working in the 3D view because it gives me a chance to evaluate the height of my camera path and make some adjustments. Like, whoa, I've got this one little lip here where it's jumping upwards. So I want to smooth that down here, get the camera path a little bit more even as we get to the end of the render. So, like I said, each one of those blue dots is a keyframe. So there's keyframe number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And now what we want to look at is the velocity of the camera. So this is keyframe number 11. So when we get to keyframe number 12, as we start approaching the entry doors here, we want to start slowing down the camera. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the far clip so that our camera can see infinitely now through the model, which is good. And now what we need to do is talk about editing the camera's speed. So what we need to do is go down to the Walkthrough Frames dialog box. So you'll see that in the Properties palette here. If you folks go to page 14 of the notes, we're going to have a look at that same dialog box here. So typically when we're making videos, we want a frame rate of anywhere from, say, 24 to 30 frames per second. So I'm going to use 24 frames per second. And typically we want to have a rendering that's at most a minute long. So if we take 300 frames and we divide it by 24 frames per second, we've got a rendering that's only 20 seconds long. So that's probably not quite enough. So if I take this up to about 2000 frames and hit apply, now we've got a video that's about 83 seconds long. And that's pretty good. Now, what we want to do now is adjust the speed of the camera so that when we get to about keyframe 12, we can slow down the camera so that we're not going to fly through the building, you know, at 7 meters per second, which is a pretty good clip. That's like someone moving, hauling along pretty good on a bicycle. So unless you want to be riding a bicycle through the building, we need to adjust the speed of the camera. So what we're going to do is uncheck uniform speed. Revit will show you the approximate velocity of the camera. So a nice path through the building is, say, 1.5 meters per second or 1 meter per second for your speed inside a building. Outside the building, that's probably about right. In fact, even a little bit faster might not be a bad thing. So once we get to keyframe 12, I'm going to start putting on the brakes. So you can see my speed is dropping down here. So once I get inside the building, I want to drop down to, 2 meters per second tops. So 0.2 is my acceleration factor here. So I'm just going to use that acceleration factor for wherever I'm in the building. So I just need to count keyframes because I want to stay at 0.2 frames until I get completely outside of the building. So where does that put me? 1, 2, 3, well, I think 11 was here. So 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Got to keep going here until I get to keyframe 22. Okay, and then once I get out into the courtyard, I can begin to speed up the camera a little bit. But then as I get towards the end, I want to slow the camera back down. And I'm going to really slow it back down for the end of the video. So we get a nice, calm completion to our video. So there we go. We can hit OK. And now we can go into our walkthrough. Just double click on it this time. to have a look and see how it's going to go. So to preview the walkthrough, click on the crop region and okay, so we're in edit walkthrough mode here. We're at our last frame. Let's go to frame number 1. Enter. So there's the beginning of our walkthrough. I'm going to turn on shading here. And let's give this a go. Okay, yes. Edit. Play. Now my first take on this is that it looks like it's a little bit slow. When you are viewing it in shaded mode, you're probably going to get a pretty good impression of what this, the speed of this thing is actually going to be like. So that is definitely a bit slow. So I'm just going to hit escape here. And I'm going to go back to walkthrough frames here, and I'm going to increase my frames to 30 per second. And I'm going to take my total frames and knock it down to 1800. So there you go, 60 seconds long. Hit OK. So let's try this again. Edit walkthrough and play. So that's a little bit faster, but not maybe not as fast as it could be. Now, if you want to make a rendering or a walkthrough that's a little bit more realistic looking than this, because this is pretty blocky, what you can do is change the graphic display mode to realistic. What it'll do at that point is that, of course, your trees will show their foliage and your building will have a more realistic presentation of itself. If you try and do it in fully rendered mode, that could take a very, very long time, and I wouldn't recommend it. So here you can see how we're feeling about this. I actually think I'm too close to the building, and I could have lowered the camera's targeting. So when you're going through the walkthrough preview, it's a kind of good chance for you to evaluate how the camera is targeting. So again, I'd probably change the targeting of the camera in those first 2 keyframes so that it's a little bit lower. The rest of this though is looking pretty good. So let's just talk about how you can get the a change in how this looks. So like I said, you can turn on realistic mode. So that will show the foliage. You could also turn on shading, or shadows rather. And you might also want to adjust your graphic display options so that your lighting is still lighting. So here we'll choose a date and time. Oh, that's pretty dark. Let's see here. Now another thing, of course, is that with your lighting, you can increase your lighting values here. That should make things a little brighter. Indeed it does. And another thing that we can do is we can turn off show edges. So instead we just get colors. Okay, so this would be a way that you could get your rendering, your walkthrough done. This would probably still take overnight though. So if you're happy with what you're seeing here, you can go to File, Export, and then down to Images and Animations, and export your walkthrough. And again, you can choose the size that you want for the dimensions. So if you want to do at least 720p for your number of pixels, there you go. Most people want at least 720 pixels. So if you want to do full HD, you'd want to do 1080 pixels. There you go. Hit save, and away it would go. So like I said, this would probably take at least overnight. So it'd be something that you would set up as you're leaving the office for the day, and let Revit do its thing overnight. Okay, so that is it for our notes for tonight. So we've got a few more moments here. If you folks have any questions about your term project, we will turn the floor over to you folks so that you can ask your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and finish up the recording. And these will be put on YouTube sometime in the next day or so.